This evening I want to give a bit of a personal talk. We're still carrying on in the theme of entering the mythic realm. And I wanted to talk to you about one of the governing myths of my life, I think you could say. There's no very precise calibration about this kind of thing, so I'm speaking imaginatively. I'm speaking about stories, the kind of story of my life in a certain way. And the myth that I'm going to describe it as is the myth of insight. The myth of insight. And hopefully it'll become a little bit clearer as we go what I mean by that. Because there's no clear delineation of just what the myth of insight might be. But I'll start out just mentioning that the spiritual life, and in particular the goal of the spiritual life, can be seen in many different ways. And probably some ways appeal to us more than other ways. And Vajrapriya has said that the way we see enlightenment is it can only be in terms of the skandhas, in terms of the categories of the psychophysical organism, because that's all we know really. So I won't go into what the skandhas are in any detail, but if we take the body, for example, if we take our physical form, then we can see awakening in terms of a complete harmonization and liberation of the physical energies. So this is, for example, one way that you might find it in the yogic tradition. Maybe something like, especially Kundalini yoga. I've got Liz sitting next to me on my little square. So that's the thinking of awakening, of enlightenment in terms of the physical form. For example, if we take the feeling quality of our experience, sometimes enlightenment is called the supreme bliss. The supreme bliss. So it's moving from dukkha to sukha, to bliss, to happiness in that way. If we look at it in terms of samya, in terms of perception, in terms of apperception, understanding, this is a slightly more cognitive way of understanding enlightenment. So it is purified cognition, it's correct and insightful understanding. So this is the area that I'm going into a bit more. If we look at awakening in terms of sanskaras, in terms of our whole emotional, volitional nature, I think there's a few different ways we can look at it. So, for example, we could look at it in terms of love, in terms of compassion. It's like enlightened emotion becomes compassion, becomes love. I think we can also look at it in terms of our volitional nature, sanskaras as our volitions, in which case we can see enlightenment, excuse my phone, in terms of freedom, in terms of complete freedom of being. And then finally, if we look at awakening in terms of consciousness, vijnana, I think maybe we can see awakening as purified awareness, pure awareness, or pure consciousness. Luminous consciousness is one way that the Buddha talked about it. So there's all these different ways of envisioning awakening. And as I went through, maybe one or other of those spoke to you a bit more than others. It's worth noticing your own responses to that. So I was talking in terms of liberating body energies, in terms of bliss, in terms of insight, in terms of love or compassion, in terms of freedom and in terms of luminous or purified awareness. And as I said, I'm going to home in a little bit on what I'm calling the myth of insight. So I'll take you back to when I think I'm 6, roughly 6, and it's I remember a painting that I painted at infant school. I can only remember 2 paintings that I painted at infant school. One was the very first one. I suspect I'd never painted before, and I hadn't a clue what to do. I was put in front of a piece of paper and paints, and I thought, what do I do? And I looked around at other people, and they were all drawing a green line at the bottom and a blue line at the top. So grass and sky and a little child's house in the middle. So that's the first painting I remember. And the second painting I remember is one that I got a gold star for. That's why I remember it. I went to the headmaster to get a gold star, and it was a painting of a man wearing square glasses, probably like my usual glasses. These are my usual glasses, square glasses, with all these test tubes in front of him and different coloured liquids in the test tubes. So this was obviously my image of what a scientist was. It was a chemist with all these different interesting chemicals in test tubes. So I'll fast forward a little bit from primary school. And I'm now in Nepal. I'm doing a walking trip in Nepal. And I had spent 2 weeks in an area in the Everest region. So I'd spent 2 weeks above 4,000 meters. And then I come down into the lowlands, even the lowlands, you got these huge 1,000 meter going up and down and up and down. And I was feeling like an Olympic athlete because I had all this thick blood in me after being at high altitude. And I was yomping up and down these hills. And my walking companions were both sick for different reasons. I'd sort of go yomping up this huge great hill, and then I'd have to stop to wait for them. So I was standing there, and this happened on a few occasions, but one of them I remember very, very clearly. I was just standing there, waiting. And all of the vegetation is very rich vegetation. All the vegetation around me, it was like a child's pop-up book. It went from being 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional. And suddenly I just started noticing more and more and more around me. And I just realized that the world was much more than I usually took it to be. I realized that there's more going on than I'd never noticed before. That there's this whole kind of depth dimension to what I'd now call awareness. And it just needed a bit of time and space to unfold itself. And this felt like a kind of parting of the curtains. So I'd not come across Buddhism. I didn't really know. I didn't have any interest in any spirituality at all. I should have said that I went on from my 6-year-old self. I went on to become an engineer, trained as an engineer at university. So I was a technologist, and I was interested in the world of things, but not in the sense of awareness. I wanted to understand. I wasn't interested in looking closely at the world around me, so it seemed. I know those things don't seem to add up, do they? Anyway, this came as like a parting of the curtains. I realized there's a whole depth to experience, which wasn't about books and learning more. It was just about looking and seeing. So at this stage, I want to throw in a little film. I've got 3 little film clips to show you. These are 3 films that I find have aspects of them which are very compelling. And the first one is probably one of my favourite ones, especially for this topic, and it's an extract from The Truman Show. And there might be some people who don't know what The Truman Show is. So Truman was born into a film set. this is a forerunner of reality TVs, was born into a film set and he lives on this film set, which is a big town, and everyone in the town are actors and actresses, and everywhere he goes, he's being filmed. There's hidden cameras everywhere, even inside the car radio, as you'll see. And his life is being beamed live around the world, where billions of people are hooked on the everyday life of this happy-go-lucky fella called Truman. And he's completely unaware that he is the center of this film until things start happening and he starts suspecting. So let's see if I can get the tech to work and show you a bit of Truman Show. So we're picking it up in a scene called Paranoia, which is where he first starts to get a sense that there's something funny going on. Here we go. And let's make sure I've got the right settings for you. Oops, I'll just stop because I need to share my audio as well, or it won't be nearly so much fun. Here we go.
A beautiful day in paradise, folks, but don't forget to buckle up out there in Radioland. Remember, good driver, good, and a safe driver. Here's a good driver, good driver, good.
Wait for the cue back down, wait for the cue. Stand by one. Countdown to action. Stand by, everybody, stand by one. He's heading west on Stewart. Stand by all extras. Gloria, he'll be on you in about 90 seconds. Pops, make sure the coffee's hot. Okay, he's making his turn onto Lancaster Square. Oh my God, he nearly hit Ballard. Something's wrong. Change frequencies.
Ouch. Sorry about that, folks. I guess we picked up a police frequency or something. It sometimes happens, and it can drive you crazy. Okay, it's classical Clive back in here, and we've still got some great music up ahead. But hey, don't forget to buckle up. Remember safety. Good driver's a safe driver. Safe driver is what? Yes.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, I love it.
A mí no me interesa. Bueno, señorita, hasta luego. Las noticias son muy importantes. Ya lo sé, por eso que no tienes dinero para...
Can I help?
Oh, yeah, I have an appointment at Gable Enterprises.
They went bust.
What's happening?
Nothing.
Just tell me what's happening.
Got the poster. We're remodeling.
No, you're not. What are those people doing?
It's none of our business. It's none of your business.
You don't tell me what's happening, I'll report you!
Well, you're trespassing.
So there's some moments in there that I find really thrilling, physically thrilling, especially when the lift doors open and he sees behind the scenes. There's something about that image that, well, it's a kind of sense of seeing past the superficialities of life, isn't it? Seeing deeper behind what we usually take as the facade of life. Maybe I shouldn't try and explain why I find it so moving, but I do. And also that moment when the radio frequencies go all funny and everyone stops. So I didn't get paranoid after my experience in Nepal, but I did start following a scent. I realized that there's something I needed to follow here. And I ended up in Sri Lanka, and I went on my first ever Buddhist retreat, a 5-day retreat in Sri Lanka. So that's what was the start of my Dharma path, really. So, I mean, there's lots that could be said, but I'll fast forward again quite a way. I'll fast forward to my ordination in Guyaloka in 2002. So that was 4 months in beautiful mountains in Spain, in completely perfect conditions. It really suited me, with long spells of meditation practice, of ritual, and it was an initiation. It was a very cleverly crafted initiation. And of course, at the point of ordination, which in those days was about halfway through, about 2 months in, you are ordained and given a new name. And in fact, just before that had happened, there'd been a ritual, which I won't tell you about, but during the course of the ritual, I realized I had a strong affinity with the image of the Vajra. And I realized slightly uncomfortably that I really wanted a name with Vajra in it, but it's not in my control what my name was. But anyway, my preceptor was a step ahead of me. He not only gave me the name Vajrapriya, but he gave me the Vajrasattva initiation, the sadhana practice. And then after that, there's quite a long period during which we're doing insight meditation practices. And this was a time that it really felt like the doors stayed open for periods of time, and I could really take a good poke around and see what Buddhism had been talking about, what I've been learning about all this time. So I think at that point, and just the mind in those conditions was just so clear, and I mean, at the time it didn't particularly feel like it, but in retrospect I could see that's what was happening. The mind was very clear and very still, fairly pure really, and as I say, there's a lot more understanding unfolding. And I just want to have a little interlude, watching a bit of Thelma and Louise. So Thelma and Louise, 2 women from really unhappy households, unhappy marriages or partnerships, and they go out on this road trip. And the road trip turns into something a bit more than they'd planned. I won't tell you what it was, but they are on the run, cross country through the States, through this amazing scenery in the States. And here's a little moment of Thelma having a moment a little bit like me in Nepal. Oops, here we go.
Awake? Guess you could call it that. My eyes are open.
Me too. I feel awake.
Good.
Wide awake. I don't remember ever feeling this awake. You know what I mean? Everything looks different. You feel like that too? Like you got something to look forward to?
So there's something about that language of awake. You're awake. I feel awake, wide awake, which I find very compelling. And I suppose that's part of the myth of insight, isn't it? Wakefulness. Bodhi means awake, awakened, the awakened one. Buddha means the awakened one. And it's interesting that both the metaphors we have, or both the words we have for enlightenment, well, we've got enlightenment and we've got awakening. They both seem to be in this myth of insight as far as I can see. I like the language of awakening, because awakening is something we do every day, isn't it? And it gives us a visceral sense of what awakening, capital A, might be like. So when we're dreaming, it's like we're in this kind of, well, often quite a claustrophobic situation. We're sort of locked into this kind of world, aren't we? We're locked into this world with this thing we've got to do, or this situation that we're in, and all the emotions that come out of really believing that this is what's going on. And then when we wake up, all of those emotions can release because we realize, oh, it's just a dream. It's just a dream. And I think that's got to be something of the flavour of awakening, capital A. And maybe something even a little bit closer to awakening, capital A, isn't waking out of a dream, but it's waking into a dream. It's lucid dreaming. I don't know if you've had lucid dreams when you don't wake up out of the dream, you actually realise what in the dream that it is a dream. Oh, right, I'm dreaming. Oh, right, all of this is all a dream. It's rather magical. I find them really important experiences. They have the taste of insight to me. And I think it was just about a week ago I had one of these dreams. And I was just playing with this. Thing. I was quite conscious in a certain sort of way. Here I'm in a dream, and I was playing with the way that sight and touch are so closely correlated. We think that things are real, don't we? Because we can touch something and we can see it. And those two senses are so closely correlated. Yeah, that's definitely there. Yeah. Seeing is believing, touching is believing, the two together is really convincing. And I was doing that in my dream. I was touching something and looking at it and thinking, yep, this doesn't prove anything. This is a dream. I know it's a dream, and this doesn't prove anything. So there's this language of lucid dreaming I find very important to me. So anyway, going back to ordination, and soon after ordination, I went through a little phase, a reading phase. I sometimes have phases of reading a certain kind of thing. And I went through a phase of reading myths about magicians. So I got very interested in Arthurian legend because, not because of the figure of King Arthur, but because of the figure of Merlin. I found Merlin a very compelling figure, a magician. So you may have come across a well, there's a book called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, which is by a couple of Jungian therapists who are involved in men's movement. And they say that the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover are the four masculine archetypes. And so the magician being one of those four masculine archetypes. The feminine version, I think, is probably the crone or the wise old woman. So the magician is a figure that crops up an awful lot in mythology, of course. So it's not just Merlin. In contemporary mythology, we've got Lord of the Rings and Gandalf, or we've got Star Wars and Obi-Wan Kenobi. I also did quite a lot of reading of a series called the Earthsea Quartet. You might have come across, what's her name? I've forgotten her name, it'll come back to me. I'm trying to lip read at the moment. Ursula Le Guin, which revolves around the figure of Ged. So I'll maybe say a little bit about those two things, but one of the things about the magician, there's a few qualities of the magician according to Moore and Gillette, these people who talked about the king, warrior, magician, lover. The magician has arcane esoteric knowledge. They can see deeper than the non-magician. In my language, they can see deeper levels of conditionality at work. And because they can see deeper levels of conditionality at work, they can interact with the world and even manipulate the world in ways that appear magical. So there's a kind of a scientific aspect and a kind of understanding aspect, but also a technological aspect, because they can actually affect the world. They can perform magic. It can be black magic, of course. They can be harmful. There's also a third aspect of the magician. If we think in terms of the shaman, they can initiate. They can initiate people. So this is what I'd experienced at Gikuloka. I'd experienced my preceptor, Kulanand, as initiating me. I could definitely see him as a magician. And interestingly for me now, I'm in the process of, if you like, learning to initiate other people. People have asked me to ordain them, which is quite an initiation for me to learn how to initiate. But I'll just mention a few things about what will I mention? I think I maybe just mention one of these magicians, Ged, from the Earthsea Quartet, because there's one little story which I found interesting. Early on in his magician career, he's called out, in fact, it's his first job, he's called out to this very distant island in this archipelago, where there are dragons, and the dragons are terrorizing the nearby island. And the dragons aren't meant to do this. But anyway, they're being a bit naughty. So he goes to the dragon's island, and there's all these baby dragons, and he kills them off quite easily. But then this huge, vast dragon, the daddy dragon, comes. And there's no way that Ged can sort him out. But he's got a little secret up his sleeve. What he does is he knows the dragon's name. And in this worldview, and in many different worldviews, names have power. So he binds the dragon to an oath upon his name, and the dragon nevermore causes terror. And there's a very interesting correlation here, or parallel, with Padmasambhava. You might know the story of Padmasambhava entering Tibet and subduing the demons of Tibet. And he does it by calling on their name, and he gives them a secret name, and thereby he binds them by an oath. And the figure of Padmasambhava definitely has something of the magician about him. In fact, interestingly, Padmasambhava has all four of the mature masculine archetypes in him. You might know the mantra, Vajraguru Omar Hung, Vajraguru Padma Siddhi Hung, Vajraguru Padma Siddhi Hung. So the Vajra, I think, has the warrior, the cutting power of the warrior. The Guru has something of the king. The Padma has something of the lover, the lotus. Padma means lotus, the lover. And Siddhi, or Siddha, I think has got something of the magician. Siddha means accomplishment, something like that. Anyway, I just find it interesting that Padmasambhava presents a very unified, balanced figure in many different ways, and one of them is in terms of these 4 archetypes of masculinity. So what is it about insight that's significant to me? I think one of the things is, being a scientist, being a technologist, I can very easily be drawn into superficiality, drawn into the superficial things of the world. From a dharmic perspective, I'm interested in things and how things work. And what I have to remember is that behind those things, there's a much deeper reality. There's a lot more at stake than just making my waterproof basement, which is my basement waterproof, which is my current obsession. So how do I get beyond the superficialities, absorption in superficialities of life? I have to remember to look deeper. When I was quite young in my Dharma life, I was very interested in some of Sangharakshita's language around reality. He'd talk a lot about the nature of reality, or the texture of reality. He used the word reality a lot. And I thought, yeah, that's it, that's what I want. I want reality, I want to know what it's all about. And I think it's taken me quite a while in my Dharma life to realize that it's not like there's something behind those sliding lift doors. It's not like there's something completely different behind there. It's more about my relationship to reality, if you like, and my relationship to what I'm experiencing. So that the Buddhism doesn't really have a word for reality, not a very good translation of it anyway. It's got, for example, tatata, which means thusness, just as it isness. It's just this. So it's experience without all of our ideas laid on top of it. It's got that great Pali compound, yata bhuta jnana dasana, knowledge and vision of things as they really are, or actually of things as they come into being, is a closer translation. Yata bhuta jnana dasana. And I realize that there's a shadow side to the magician, or a shadow side to the myth of insight, which is wanting to understand for its own sake, wanting arcane knowledge for its own sake, to impress, to be right. And I can definitely see that operating within me. And it's only really in the last, I don't know how many years, the last number of years, that I've been more interested in deeper seeing, in insight, for the sake of liberation for all. Seeing the connection between insight and liberation, which Sangharakshita brings out very fully in his talk, A Taste of Freedom. A Taste of Freedom, which is talking about the first 3 fetters. You break the first 3 fetters, and that is equivalent to insight. And what that does is it gives you freedom, liberation, vimutti. So it's this connection between insight, seeing more deeply, and becoming free that is becoming more compelling for me, and thereby helping other people to free themselves. So I'd like to finish off with a short clip from The Matrix. So I'm sure many of you will know The Matrix, but I'll give you a very quick Tracy, because there are interesting parallels with our existential situation. So humankind, all the human beings are embedded in this machine that induces in them virtual, well, they're all in a virtual reality machine, you could say. They're all living virtual lives. They're not living real lives. And they're being farmed for their energy as it happens, but that doesn't matter. Some people are trying to break out of the matrix, break out of this virtual reality machine, and they can unplug themselves by taking this pill, which propels them into this very seedy little world. But they're trying to break into the matrix to dismantle it. And so they re-enter this virtual reality, knowing that that's what they're inside, rather than being completely blinded by it. So it's like a lucid dream. They start lucid dreaming inside the matrix in order to battle it, in order to battle the baddies. And there's all these sort of virtual agents within the matrix trying to kill them off, trying to kill off these people who have come to, who know what's going on. These are called Agent Smiths. These people called Agent Smith, who are basically Mara. You could say they're a bit like Maras. So as soon as someone becomes wakeful inside the matrix, these agents are dispatched like Maras to sort them out. And in order to battle an Agent Smith, you need a very, very high level of awakening, a very, very high level of realization of the nature of the matrix. And no one has fully got there yet until now. I'm sorry, this is a bit of a spoiler if you've not seen it. This is the very end of the film. Just got to find it now. Here we go. Here's Neo, our hero.
Now get up.
He is the one.
So there's Neo coming to his final awakening, you could say. He had enough insight into the nature of the Matrix that Mara's army, well, the bullets didn't exactly turn into flowers, but they just dropped at his feet. I like that image. And so with that insight, then he could gain liberation. He could gain the freedom of the situation he was in. So I'll leave it at that. We've gone on a little bit. So in terms of what I'd like to invite you to do in your breakout rooms, there might have been something in the talk that struck a note that you want to talk about. But maybe you'd also like to reflect on which of the myths of awakening appeal to you. So I talked about awakenings in the body through freedom of body energy. I talked about bliss, the bliss of awakening. I talked about insight. I talked about love, compassion. I didn't actually mention, but I should mention equanimity. total equanimity in the face of whatever we meet. I talked about freedom. I talked about pure awareness or luminous awareness. So you could just play to see if any of those appeals to you. So I shall ask Vajradevi to break us up into groups, please.